and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Today marks 33 years since Ops Lalang, arguably one of the biggest crackdowns on dissidents using the Detention Without Trial law, the Internal Security Act. 106 politicians, NGO activists, academics and students were arrested at that time. The Home Ministry also withdrew the printing and publishing licenses of The Star, Sinchu and Watan, restoring them only 5 months later. Now, does this instance of state repression and abuse of power have contemporary relevance? We speak now to the political analyst Chandra Muzaffar, one of the many detained during Ops Lalang in 1987. Chandra, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Now, at that point in time of Ops Lalang, you were a member of Aliran and a prominent figure of civil society. Did you see the operation as a way to silence dissent, to silence your voice?
Thank you for your invitation. Well, our analysis of what happened at that time was that it was perhaps directed at dissent in Malaysian society, because dissent was taking on a particular shape at that time. We've always had dissent in Malaysian society, dissent expressed through political parties, the electoral process and so on, and also some dissent outside the electoral arena. But by the 80s, the mid-80s, it was clear that civil society dissent outside the electoral arena was becoming a phenomenon, and many of these groups were involved in a whole variety of issues. And at that particular point in time, there were some issues which large segments of our society were concerned about, amongst them the United Engineers Malaya contract, issues pertaining to Chinese school administrators, and other similar issues. And it had given rise to a growing crescendo of dissident voices. And one got the impression that this crackdown, since it involved quite a few civil society actors, was an attempt to silence the growing body of civil society dissent. That is one reading of what had happened.
Chandra, I can interject. There's also another reading of the events, not just of 87, but over the modern period, which is that when political elites fight each other, they resort to using repressive measures across society in order to maintain themselves in power. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yes, to some extent. There was also a factor because, there was this crisis within UMNO, the Mahathir-Razali friction, and it had come to the fore in April 1987, and the crackdown took place in October 1987. So this was part of it, though I don't think it was the only reason. It was also, if you look at the people who were arrested, it was directed at dissent as such.
Do you think there's any justification of using repressive action, the state using repressive action like this?
Well, the ISA was framed by the British, of course, as we all know, to curb dissent against the colonial government. And the post-colonial government continued with that law. The promise at the outset in 1959, 1960 was to use it only against individuals, groups that posed a direct threat to the security of the nation. And the question of security was linked to the communist threat. But if you look at the people who were arrested, if you look at the way the ISA was applied, not just in 1987, but even in, and on a number of other occasions before that, it was clearly directed at dissent, or the type of dissent that the ruling elite could not tolerate.
Do you see...
Was,
sorry, to interrupt you, sorry to interrupt you, but I was just wondering whether you see the same conditions today, the same kind of intolerance for dissent today.
Well, I think things have changed somewhat, you know. If I look at the positive side of the protests against the ISA and long period of confronting laws like the ISA, dissent in Malaysia, I think, has acquired a certain degree of legitimacy. Dissent over issues pertaining to the environment, for instance, women's rights, and even other issues. At one time, these were frowned upon, but today you find that there is a certain degree of tolerance of issues of this sort. By today, I do not mean just what has happened in the last few years. I'm talking of maybe the last 10 or 15 years. There has been a change of sorts as far as the attitude towards dissent is concerned. There's a lot more to be accomplished. I think we have yet to reach a point where we regard the legitimacy of dissent as vital to the democratic process. We haven't reached that point at all. And we haven't institutionalized dissent the way it has been institutionalized in some other emerging democracies. We haven't reached that point. But nonetheless, I think if you look at the situation today, when I compare it to those early days when we just started our era in 1977, and, you know, some of us, various groups that were involved in various citizens' causes, there has been some change for the better.
Okay. Chandra, do you think there is an authoritarian impulse, not just among the elite, but actually in the population, in the sense that they are willing to forego their own rights in exchange for something? And I'm thinking specifically of the current pandemic. Do you think there are Malaysians who will forego their liberties and democratic rights if they are promised that repression or authoritarianism would deliver them from this disease?
I would put it in a different way, Sharaad. I would say that if people can be promised that their health would be taken care of, that there would be stability, and most of all, that there would be jobs. Because I think that is something very, very vital for a lot of people today. That the economic situation will improve for them, they'll be able to put food on the table for their family and so on. I think if they can be assured of that, and if the bargain is that there will be some restrictions on personal liberties, not just Malaysians, I think a lot of people in various parts of the world, they'll be prepared to forego personal liberties to an extent, in exchange for, well, economic stability leading to jobs and, you know, a certain degree of economic comfort.
Chandra, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. We really appreciate your time. We're going to take a quick break here on Consider This, but we'll be back with more on this issue. Stay tuned. Hi, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan. Let's continue our conversation about Ops Lalang, which happened on this day 33 years ago. Have we left this dark past behind? Can we be sure it will not happen again? Joining us now to discuss this further, we have Akwa Kia Soong. He's the former Ops Lalang detainee. Kia Soong, good evening. Today, you wrote an op-ed in which you asked if Dr Mahathir will finally show remorse and apologize for Ops Lalang. Now, why is this important to you? Are you still angry at Mahathir after 33 years?
No, I'm not angry at him. I think to me it's an outrage against Malaysians in general, because to me the Operation Lalang, besides being an abuse of power, abuse of the rule of law in arresting and detaining without trial more than 100 people, innocent Malaysians in 1987, the main focus of Operation Lalang and the climate of terror that was inflicted at the time was Mahathir's main purpose in assaulting the judiciary. And the reason why he wanted to do that was because the Team A, Team B court case was coming up in the court. And after he assaulted the judiciary, meaning the sacking of the Lord President and 3 Supreme Court judges, it put paid to the result of the Team A, Team B court case. Because if he had lost the court case, he would have lost the premiership. And to me, it was a very cynical use of the Internal Security Act, which was a detention without trial. And I and 100 over other people were the factless victims of this very cynical act by Dr. Mahathir.
Soong, you're a sociologist. Your wife has also written a book, I believe, about the history of the use of the Internal Security Act and Kwame Monroe. Do you see patterns in the use of repressive laws and do you think they remain with us even though the ISA has been repealed?
Oh, certainly. We had recent cases, for example, the detention of Maria Chin, the detention of the 2 lawyers, Khairuddin and Matthias Chang. We had the detention of the 12 alleged LTTE sympathizers. These are very recent cases, and they were arrested under SOSMA, the Special Offences Act. And it shows that detention without trial is still with us. There's been the ISA, the very infamous ISA, has now been replaced by SOSMA, by POCA, the Prevention of Crime Act, and by POTA, the Prevention of Terrorism Act. And the Dangerous Drugs Act has been with us ever since a long time ago. And the total number of people arrested and detained without trial under these laws is still considerable.
Can I ask you about the detention without trial laws? I mean, why didn't, despite promises to do so, the Pakatan Harapan government succeed in repealing such laws? Is it because in any government such laws are needed, such power is needed?
I don't think so. I don't think it's because there's a necessity to have these laws. It just shows that during the time of, after 2018, when the so-called reform coalition had taken over the country, they still had people like Dr. Mahathir leading the coalition as the Prime Minister. And he had no intention of doing away with these laws. And that was one of the drawbacks of that so-called reformist coalition. But I think detention without trial doesn't have to exist. Malaysia is probably one of the few countries in the world where detention without trial has been part of the furniture in the country.
Right. So there will be people who argue that there is real terrorism in the world and in Malaysia. There are extremists in our political system, or extremists could emerge, and so that these laws are necessary. We want to avoid the abuse of these laws against legitimate dissent, but perhaps the laws are still necessary for those elements in society that will not play by the democratic game, and therefore these laws become important to safeguard society.
No, the thing is that in most of these countries, for example, in the United States and in the West, like Britain and Europe, etc., they actually have terrorism activities going on. We know in recent years some of these activities, some of these incidents that have happened. In Malaysia, but in contrast, we haven't had these incidents yet. We have had one terrorist in Indonesia that was killed, I think, Mat Top, his name was. But for some reason, he was never ever arrested and detained in Malaysia. And we have had in contrast, we have people like myself and others, and Maria Chin and Khairuddin and Matthias Chang and these 12 alleged LT. And what have we done? We haven't done anything that's dangerous. Okay. And the thing about these so-called anti-terrorism laws that are meant to protect the citizens of the country, in countries like the United States and the West and Australia and New Zealand, these are laws that are not applied to their own citizens. They are applied only to foreigners. And that is something that many people in this country do not realize. And so what I'm trying to say is, in this country, we haven't actually seen any or many terrorism activities yet, any incidents. And we are having all this whole array of so-called anti-terrorism laws since 1960, you know, when the emergency ended.
Yeah, so I want to come back very quickly to the conversation about stifling dissent, about repressing dissent. Now, I'm wondering whether, you know, the events of 33 years ago has contemporary relevance today. What can we do, learning from the lessons of 33 years ago, to make sure that Ops Lalang never happens again to stifle dissent, dissenting voices?
Well, one of the biggest drawbacks, one of the biggest regrets we have of the 2018 victory by Pakatan Harapan was that within Pakatan Harapan there were all these people who were with Swaram, people who were former reformists, people who were the NGO activists, who have been campaigning against detention without trial. They didn't push hard enough for the repeal of this dastardly act. And that is the biggest drawback. We could have had the opportunity, and then it's only when Dr. Mahathir lost the plot and gave up the ghost in early 2020 that we are back to square one. But they could have had the chance during between 2018 to 2020 to do that. In fact, they had given NGOs a false hope that they were going to implement these reforms, but they never did.
So, because of that failure, are we today in danger of seeing a repeat of Ops Lalang? Is this still very much a possibility?
Well, in theory it is. It's whether they'll use it again is something else. But in theory it is, because they've got a whole array of laws before them. SOSMA, PORTA, POCA, you know, etc.
Right.
And the possibility is still there.
Thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, Soong. We appreciate your time. We'll be back with more on Consider This. Don't go anywhere, stay tuned. Hi, thanks so much for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. Today marks 33 years since Ops Lalang, during which 106 people were arrested under the Internal Security Act. Nalini Elumalai is Malaysia's Program Officer at Article 19, which is an NGO dedicated to freedom of expression. She is also the former Secretary of Gerakan Mansuh ISA. Nalini, now it's been 33 years since Ops Lalang. Generally speaking, there are, I'm sure, many young Malaysians out there who may not fully appreciate the significance of this history. How do you make the contemporary connection? How do you make this history relevant to other people, say, of your generation?
Thank you, Mel and Sheriff, for having me here on this show today. When Operation Lalang happened, I was 5 years old. And exactly on this date, you know, 100 over people was arrested under the ISA, and we call it Operasi Lalang. I think how, as a younger generation, you know, people need to know the untold history of power that has been misused by the powerful at that point of time. And I had the privilege being exposed to politics and human rights in a very early age when I was a student in UKM. But I also realized that was never the case for everyone, especially the younger generation at the moment. But having said that, we have to continue to have discourse on this particular incident with the current generation and younger generation, because it has a lot of impact on our institutions and human rights since then. the younger generations are witnessing and going through some uncomfortable life when their space to express are still limited, and they can see from the social media and news that what's happening now in 1987 might have some differences, but we're still fighting to get space and to express ourselves. So for me, it's important for younger generation, or even anyone from any generation to that matter, that the environment that we live in now is linked to the historical events such as Operasi Lalang. But we also...
Yeah, sorry, if I can jump in, Nalini, the question of how your peers see this, and those, younger than you, often they are trained to think of these laws as necessary. They are trained to believe that Malaysia is a kind of ticking time bomb when it comes to questions of race and religion and so on and so forth, and that these measures are there to protect them. Do you see that many young people buy this particular line of argument, that the Internal Security Act or state control or repression of this sort is necessary? It's a necessary evil, if you like.
I think it's two conversation. I think there's two opinions out there. The one particular group will be thinking that this is unnecessary and our freedom is being limited. And one particular group is realizing that something is wrong and things like that. But also one particular group of younger generation may not have the information, may not have the privilege to know more. Or there are people who actually, doesn't want to know more about these laws that may be limiting their freedom and also undermining their freedom to express. I think for me, as an activist who's been working on the ground for many years, I see these two types of people exist. But our responsibility and our contribution should be like, we should educate more and create awareness to this younger generation. Like why we are saying certain laws are actually dangerous to them as well. It took like 30 years for us to make people understand why ISA should get rid of ISA and why it should be abolished. In 2009, the Soong 50,000 people came on the street to say no to ISA. So it took a while. It is a process of educating and creating awareness. And I hope with the existence of social medias and all these news channels and all the media that are available, we can make use of that to create awareness to the younger generation. That's
precisely what I kind of want to touch on a little bit deeper. Because you led that campaign again, under Gerakan Mansur ISA. ISA was repealed in 2012. All these other detention without trial laws, the POCA, the SOSMA, the POTA, the Dangerous Drugs Act, all of that doesn't seem to have as much, public awareness as, say, ISA. So how would you look at mobilizing against these types of repressive state apparatus?
I think one of the ways that we used during GMI campaign is like, for example, at that point of time, we have different strategies for educating people. Like we have family support group to educate the family members. We had we did a lot of exhibition around the country to educate what is ISA and what torture and things like that. So I think even now, maybe the strategy has, we might change the strategy. We have social media to educate and things like that. But I think as for us, we need to have a strategy on how to educate the younger generation. Again, I like to reiterate that it's a process of educating. It's a process of getting in touch with the people that, doesn't even know the existence of this law. And I hope, with my experience with GMI, I've seen how particular people who have no awareness of ISA, suddenly they are there to, to get to know. And I think we have to reach out more. We have to more.
But Nalini, do you find that, in fact, people are happy to push for repeal of these repressive laws when it applies to them or people like them? So Democrats will say, yes, it shouldn't be applied to Democrats, but apply it to religious extremists, apply it to people we don't like. I mean, is there that kind of thinking as well? That people don't want to apply these principles universally?
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, people still have this thought because I believe there is no proper awareness that they have. And I think for example, when ISA was around, we always say, like, when it knocks your door, then you understand what is ISA is all about. Until it knocks your door, nobody understands what is ISA can cause to you and your family members and the trauma That's one. But I don't say that people need to go through that to understand it, but people can actually, read more, and we need to make the information available to people to understand that why this is important and why these laws need to be get rid of. I think that needs to be done, and it's two-way. People also need to have that intention. People also need to have this curiosity to go and learn and what people are saying. But also, I think as an activist and a human rights organization, I think we need to play more proactive roles to educate more people out there.
Nalini, thank you so much for speaking with us. It was a pleasure to have you join us on the show tonight. Thank you. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching. Good night.